Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to be introducing the special senses, vision and hearing. I'm going to go over the more basic structures of the sensory organs, eyes and ears. So let's start with the eye. The eye has three different layers. The first layer is the fibrous layer, all right? And the fibrous layer is made of the sclera and the cornea. So when you're looking at the outer eye, the sclera is all of that white portion that you see that covers the entire outer portion, except for this clear little portion right here, right in the most anterior portion, covering the iris. This is called the cornea, okay? So this transparent portion in the anterior of the eye is the cornea, and then you have the sclera covering the rest, all right? So that's the fibrous layer. Then you move into the eye and you have the vascular layer, all right? So looking at this model, you can see you have this really light pigmented color here. We're not going to worry about that right now. Let's focus on that dark, rich red color kind of going along the outside of the eye, okay? This is the choroid, okay? So the choroid layer is filled with blood vessels. That's why it has all of that really deep, rich red color. That's also why it's called the vascular layer, because of all the blood vessels in the choroid. Another part of the vascular layer are the ciliary bodies. So you see the choroid, as you move anterior, kind of comes to this portion here. This is called the ciliary body, all right? And it's actually what holds the lens. This is smooth muscle, so it's actually going to contract and expand to allow the lens to, well, to help focus light, okay? So we'll just take that out for a second, though. So you have the choroid layer, you have the ciliary bodies, and then you also have the iris, which I mentioned briefly. So the iris is the actual pigmented color of your eye, okay? So the iris, when you have it all together, makes a nice circle, but in the middle you have the pupil, okay? So it surrounds the pupil. The pupil is where light actually enters to the eye, and the iris will control how much light will enter. All right, so that's the vascular layer. The last layer of the eye is the neural layer, and there's really only one part. You can actually even call it the neural layer or just the retina. And that is that deep, lighter color that I was talking about before. This whole section here in this nice light peach color, that's all the neural layer or the retina, okay? Now, the eye also has some different sections. So I'm gonna bring it over to this larger model so we can see it clearly. And just to familiarize you, again, you have that outer layer of the sclera, which meets the cornea here. You have the iris and the pupil. This is where the lens would sit, and then you have the ciliary bodies. Helping the ciliary bodies, actually, you can see it very clearly on this model, are what's called suspensory ligaments. So they're those kind of white lines here. So those actually help hold in the eye or the lens a little bit more. Then you have the retina and the choroid, okay? All right, so on the eye, your two main sections are the posterior cavity and the anterior cavity. You'll also hear these referred to as segments, all right? So we know that the lens would be sitting right here. So everything posterior from that lens is the posterior segment or the posterior cavity. Go to in front of the lens and then kind of in front of the ciliary body right here. Everything in front of that is the anterior segment and the anterior cavity. Now, of course, you can't believe that simple. The anterior cavity then gets split into two again. So the anterior cavity has the anterior chamber and the posterior chamber. So again, we have the iris right here, and here's the lens. So from the cornea to the iris is the anterior chamber of the anterior segment, okay? Because there is that nice space right there. And then behind the iris to the ciliary body or the lens is called the posterior chamber of the anterior segment. And that is this tiny little portion right here. So between the iris and before the lens is just this little tiny cavity or chamber. All right. Okay, so now we can move on to the ear. So in the ear, you have 3 different regions, okay? And they're pretty simple. They're just the outer, middle, and inner, okay? So the outer, of course, is all of this and moving in, all right? So everything in that skin type colored. So this whole outer portion that we know is your elastic cartilage, connective tissue, and covered with skin, and will be can get pierced and everything. That's all called the auricle, okay? Then you have the external auditory canal. This should sound familiar because when we were going over the bones, we were looking at that structure in the temporal bone, the external auditory meatus, all right? It's basically the same thing. Okay, so then you have the auricle, the external auditory canal, and that leads us into the tympanic membrane right here. So this tympanic membrane is also called your eardrum, all right? So this is really just how sound is able to travel into the ear. Now, in the middle ear is really small, okay? It's hollow, air-filled. It's really important, though, because it houses 3 auditory ossicles, okay? These are the smallest bones in your body. They would fit, all 3 of them would fit on top of your fingernail, all right? So it's actually sitting on top of the tympanic membrane to start. So you first have the malleus, which is this guy sitting on top. Then you have the incus, which is kind of hugging the back of the malleus. And then you have the stapes, which is this, okay? So those are your 3 auditory ossicles. You also have the pharyngeotympanic tube, which is this guy right here, and it kind of leads into, so everything that's pink, okay, right in through here, that's all your middle ear. So this pharyngeotympanic tube actually has a really important job. It's how we equalize the air pressure between the internal and external, right? So when you're in a plane, you know, your ears are popping all the time. The pharyngeotympanic tube is how it maintains, so that doesn't actually happen all the time except when you're on a plane. So then the last part is the inner ear, okay? So the inner ear I can actually just take out. And this has 3 different structures. Let's not pay attention to the stapes. So you have the cochlea here, which helps with hearing. It has a bunch of structures inside of it that help with hearing. I can actually take that off maybe in a later video. Then you have the vestibule, okay, which is this kind of intersection between the cochlea and the semicircular canals, which is the last portion, okay? So you have 3 semicircular canals. They do have specific names, but we won't go over that yet. So the vestibule and the canals, they actually help detect how your head is moving and where your body is positioned, all right?